In this lesson, we're not gonna implement any new functionality, but instead, let's focus on the refactoring. So let's start cleaning up code from storage.js module. In here, I prefer to extract this function getEndOfIdleHour and move it into more appropriate module for this function. And since this function works with time, it makes sense to move this function into time.js module. So let's cut this function from here, open up time.js. Right here, let's place that function and export it right away. And we can also make this function more generic, because inside this function we can see a couple of pretty specific names, such as EndOfIdleHour, as well as lastActiveAt. So we'll make this function to work with any kind of date. So let's rename this param on just date. And of course, this function should know about idle concept. Let's rename this constant EndOfIdleHour on EndOfHour. Then we have to import seconds in our constant in this file. And also let's get rid of idle word from the name of this function. And now we can go back to storage.js and use this function. So let's replace this function with a new name, EndOfHour. And also don't forget to import this function. And now let's just rewrite this whole logic in a different form. So we're going to use ternary expression, and based on the following condition, we're going to return different results. So if this condition will be true, we're going to use the following expression to calculate the result. Otherwise, we're going to use this one. And also please note that we are not changing the logic in any way. The logic will remain the same. We're just trying to make the code more readable and concise. Please also note that at the end of this implementation, we're dividing the result by milliseconds in a second constant. And this way we are converting amount of seconds in milliseconds. So the same thing we'll have to do in our new implementation. And this operation of conversion is actually a pretty good candidate to be extracted into its own function. So let's go back to time.js. In here, let's declare a new function, which is going to convert milliseconds into seconds. It will accept one parameter, amount of milliseconds we're about to convert. And right here, let's divide amount of milliseconds by milliseconds in second constant to get amount of seconds. Sometimes we're gonna get decimal value, so to round this result, let's use method round on the mass object, like so. And now we can leverage this function and wrap these two expressions into function 2 seconds, like this. And this way the final result will be converted to seconds. And also to avoid negation in this condition, we can use equality operator and simply swap two parts of ternary expression. So now the old implementation can be removed. And also let's scroll to the very top of this file. Here we'll see that two imports are no longer used. Therefore, let's remove them. So that's that. Let's move on to the different refactoring. Back to the file time.js. Right here we have this variable timer, which stores a reference to the global timer, which runs every second and updates a reactive variable that stores current date. So let's assign this variable a little more descriptive name. For example, current date timer. And also to be consistent, we'll rename these two functions as well, to start current date timer and to stop it. But since these two functions are called somewhere else, let's find that place. They are called inside the timeline component and rename them appropriately. Start current date timer and stop current date timer. Let's also not forget to rename corresponding imports right here. Let's continue. On the activities page of our application, we can see 3 default activities. They are generated at the beginning, but since now we no longer need these testing activities, we can remove them. So inside of activities.js module, there is a function called generate activities, which generates array of default activities. So we're going to use an empty array instead to have an empty list of activities at the beginning. This way, generate activities function is no longer used. Let's remove this function, as well as a couple of unused imports at the top of this file. There is also some commented code inside timelineitems.js module, so let's open up this module and remove all these comments. Let's also scroll to the top. Here we can see another comment. Let's remove this. And if we'll open up activities page again, we still can see those 3 default activities. That is because previous application state was restored from the local storage that still contains those default activities. But if now I'll remove these activities manually and refresh the page again, the state will be updated and we will no longer see those activities. The list will be empty. And right before we finish this lesson, I prefer to add hover state to now items. So when we hover over on these items, I prefer to dim the background a bit. We should do this change inside of corresponding component responsible for rendering now item. That is now item component. Right here we see classes computed property, which stores all classes assigned to the root element of this component. So instead of just assigning bg_grade200 class conditionally based on the following condition, we're going to use same condition and still assign this class if the condition will match. But if it will not match, we're going to use another class which is going to add slightly gray background color when hovering over now item. Let's get rid of the following object, switch over to the browser, and as we can see, when I'll hover over now items, background color changes on light gray, but only for inactive now items. For the active one, it will remain the same. We will continue working on the project in the next lesson.